Mental Health Monday
on Radio City Talk
with Mick Coyle.
Tackling the stigma.
Radio City Talk.
It's Radio City Talk. My name is Mick Coyle. Welcome to Mental Health Monday for another week. We've got a really great organisation in the studio this week, and we're going to talk about eating disorders, something you may have a little bit of knowledge about. You may have heard phrases like anorexia, bulimia, binge eating as well. But what is the truth around it? And maybe what is the truth from the fiction when it comes to maybe how TV or tabloids have represented eating disorders in the past? Two workers with us in the studio from Beat Eating Disorders. They work on the helpline that does wonderful work, and will point you in the direction of all of those things as well. We've got Holly and Sophie. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. Welcome to Radio City Talk. Great to see you both. How are we?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Eating disorders. Holly, I'm going to start with you. I think some people will think, I know about eating disorders because they'll have heard about bulimia. They'll have heard about anorexia. There'll have been characters in TV shows who've sort of shown signs and symptoms of these things in the past. But I don't think people know too much in depth about where it comes from and how it sort of plays out in people's life in real time as well. But obviously through Beat, that's something that you get to see, the realities of eating disorders.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of people that do have eating disorders, it's not clear as to why. There's many reasons behind why people do develop eating disorders, such as change, changing, whether it's going to university, starting a new school, starting a new job, relationships, things like that. There's loads of things that we call triggers that can cause someone to develop an eating disorder, and it's all about spotting those signs and getting the right forms of treatment, and early intervention is something that we do really campaign for. The more people know about eating disorders and how they can help someone with an eating disorder, the better the chances of recovery are with that as well.
Can I ask you about, because sometimes people think that eating disorders is about food or different types of food, and in the conversations I've had about eating disorders, that's one of the things that comes through. Although it's about food, it's not about food.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Is there a better way of saying it than the way I've said it?
Yeah, so basically with many eating disorders, it's not about the food. It's more about control. So if, someone is like a lack of control over something in their lives, like I mentioned, like change and things like that, they can then control that through food, and that is how many eating disorders do develop.
Is that in a similar way that somebody might turn to something like self-harm, as we would understand it, that's their way of finding their way through that particular path? Yeah,
it can be. Yeah, many people do see that as a form of whether it be self-harm. I think it can vary as to why people do develop eating disorders and what they use them as a coping mechanism for.
And in regard to that, I guess it's doubly difficult when it comes to food, because food is everywhere, isn't it? It's people talk about it all the time. It's never far from people's desks or meal time. They come around all the time, and if it's been weaponized against you, that just must compound things all the time throughout the day.
That's often why people can find it quite hard to recover as well, because food is about everything. So people all the time say you've got like a family event or something, it's all about food, and if the family isn't aware or if they're not fully supportive, it can be really hard for people.
When does that sort of control issue, can that be anything that would trigger an eating disorder? Are there things that you see, are there sort of issues that you notice through the helpline that tends to lead itself toward an eating disorder?
There are some things. So particularly when we speak to younger people, you find a lot, particularly with anorexia, that younger people who are quite like perfectionist, so when they have exams, they get quite stressed about them, and they then use their eating. So they put all their stress, they focus it onto the eating instead of the actual thing that they're stressed about. So you do often find that it's the people who are able to have that perfectionism of revising for 12 hours a day that end up having an eating disorder, because they are able to focus that much on one thing. So things like having exams, or like trauma in life, like maybe parents splitting up, or things like that, maybe a death in the family, or also like bullying, but it's never just one thing. It's always like a mixture of things that have kind of built up, and this is the only way that they've known how to cope with it. So some examples, like in a family, say if the parents or maybe the rest of the family haven't really shown like negative emotions, that if a young person starts to feel those negative emotions, they might then feel like
they're not sure what to do with
they don't know what to do with
Yeah.
them. So if they haven't kind of been shown, like in school or by family, how they can cope with the emotions, they then end up coping with it through controlling the food.
So that sort of TV soap idea that somebody looks at themselves in a mirror, doesn't feel like they look exactly like they want to look, so they stop eating and they develop anorexia. That's not a typical. That might be a case, but it's not typical.
It definitely plays a part.
Right. Yeah,
It's a mixture of things, so it's kind of like a focus on body image. But then also, I think people don't realise the psychological things that happen when you do start restricting your food, because you stop experiencing emotions. So because you're not having that food, you've not got that energy, you're not going to experience emotions. So they'll stop experiencing those negative emotions. So if they're feeling low or stressed, they won't feel that, but they also won't feel anything else. So they won't feel happy or anything like that. So it does work as a coping mechanism. And at the start, it works quite well, doesn't it? It's when it becomes entrenched that it becomes a big problem.
Yeah.
And with so many of these things, it kind of lures you in as a, hey, this is going to make you feel better. And of course, long term, short, medium, long term, that doesn't prove itself to be the case. I think it's absolutely fascinating, just in those sort of opening remarks from Holly and Sophie from Beat, that people will get a wider sense of what eating disorders are all about. We're going to be signposting as part of the programme today about helplines, online services, support groups as well. There's various different organisations right across the country and here on Merseyside, and a website which I'll point you in the direction of. Let's talk, if we can, about the types of people who might develop an eating disorders. Again, that TV tabloid idea is it's the young female. I'm sure you got experience of that one. Is it older men? Can it be people in their sort of 60s? You know, what sort of, are there cut-offs that people get eating disorders? What sort of experience have you had of people calling the helpline and seeking help?
Anyone?
Yeah, absolutely anyone can develop an eating disorder. It doesn't just affect young women and young girls, which is what, like when you reference like the media and things like that, that is what's portrayed. But, unfortunately it affects anyone. So, men as well. And I think, that's not maybe talked about as much. And, we do support a lot of men and a lot of, young men as well, through their eating disorder. And I think it's just a bit of a shame that that's not talked about as much, compared to women and young girls as well. But, like you say, they can literally affect anyone, any age, any, gender, any, social background, any cultural background. They can affect anyone. And it's just so important that people are able to talk about that and not feel that, oh, well, I'm not a girl. I've not got an eating disorder.
I'm almost certain
though
that people would think, well, I might be going through this, but it's not an eating disorder because I'm a bloke in my 50s, so how could it be? And I think it's not necessarily a stigma, it's just general ignorance that people have towards the issue, because if you've not been told what an eating disorder is, how it might affect you, then it doesn't matter how old you are, or what gender you are, or where you're from, how would you know? If no one had told you, you wouldn't know, would you?
And I think because of in the media how eating disorders tend to be portrayed as like a young girl with anorexia, and when these stories go out, pictures are often like sent in that are of someone with a very low weight, whereas that isn't always the case. Like particularly with bulimia, they're rarely of a low weight. So it's unfortunate that some people will think, and this is what happens, well, I'm not of a low weight, so I mustn't have an eating disorder, whereas that's just not true at all. Yeah, it's about thoughts and feelings as well as your behaviours. So,
and it's really important to challenge those stereotypes as well. So maybe if someone's, anxious about going to the GP because they feel that they aren't underweight, that's something that is, that they do need to challenge, because, we do have GP advice leaflets on our website as well that highlight the importance of the NICE guidelines that GPs and health professionals are required to follow, which is where they are supposed to take into account of, the person's thoughts and feelings, as opposed to, the weight or the BMI and things like that. So it shouldn't, be something that maybe restricts someone from going to the GP, because there is that support out there.
You mentioned that it's not always about sort of weight loss or people looking, extremely, skinny. I was at an event the other week and there was a guy stood up and he said, the number of times I go in the media and talk about an eating disorder, and one of the questions they always ask is, have you got a photo of you at your thinnest? Because the media has this way of portraying things when you want to go, look at him healthy now, this is what he used to look like, what a transformation, and now happily ever after, which obviously isn't really the reality of it. And I don't think it's always helpful in terms of how it's reported to kind of have these sort of images that are portrayed. With that in mind, does it make it difficult sometimes, Sophie, to maybe recognise in a friend, a colleague, a family member that eating disorder might be an issue? If it's not maybe a physical thing, what are the things that we should look out for? What are those things that might, trigger somebody saying, hang on a minute, there might be an issue here. Should we go and find out some more information?
Yeah, so it definitely isn't all about the look of someone, and you do need to pay attention to other kind of things that are going on. So something that you'd recognise possibly when someone was starting to develop an eating disorder is they kind of have this obsession around food. So you might think that someone who's restricting their food wouldn't want to talk about it, whereas it's kind of the opposite, and they become quite obsessive. Say with anorexia, like limited amounts of food, that amount of food that they're allowing themselves, they plan it to be like the perfect thing, the exact thing that they want. So they can become quite obsessive around food and counting every little calorie, like just any calorie at all. They'll also have quite low self-esteem, so call themselves names and not think very well of themselves. They'll also possibly be quite secret around food, so maybe doesn't want to eat in front of you anymore, things like that. Also, something we see is like an obsession with exercise. That could be anything from walking for hours every day. And
that's something that maybe you would notice, a bit more as opposed to what they were eating and things like that. Because if they are, regularly going to the gym or, they're going out for, to do exercise like after meals and things like that, you would probably notice that more as opposed to, whether they're counting calories or, shopping for specific things. So that is something that's quite, a big giveaway around that as well.
Yeah, they have can often have quite big mood swings as well. So go from like being really happy to all of a sudden like being really down, and they can be really tired because obviously they're not getting that energy in that they need. So there is all sorts of things you can look out for. We do actually have a resource on our website, and you could email us and ask for them as well. These are the good kind of things to put up in schools. So it's kind of like just like a poster of the different signs, and you can have like a rip off at the bottom with our number, so you could put them up in like different places in school, and if you rip the first one off to make it look like someone else is taking it, and that can be a good way to get kids, or like you could put it in doctor's surgery and get people to know the signs, because it is quite difficult to know. You do think that you know, but there's things that you don't.
Yeah.
And of course people factor so much in about weight, Holly, but binge eating might also be a problem as well.
I think, many people that do, suffer with binge eating don't necessarily see it as an eating disorder. But just because, you're not restricting it doesn't mean that, there aren't other ways that you can, do that. And I think a lot of people may see, emotional overeating as a way of, something that's maybe less downplayed, but it is still an eating disorder, and there are, ways that you can get help for binge eating as well. We have specific online groups for that. We've also got book recommendations on our website. I
think it's just really important to note that if you are, or someone is suffering, because the thing with binge eating disorder is people think that because they're not purging, so people who have bulimia, they use methods of purging like over-exercising, things like that. But a person who's suffering from binge eating, they might still restrict like a person with anorexia or bulimia does, but then they do have those binges, but then they don't purge. So that's like an important thing to recognise. So we wouldn't want people who do that or don't do that to feel like, oh, because I don't purge and I only know about bulimia and anorexia, I mustn't have an eating disorder. And we're not saying like someone definitely does, but it's just important that if you feel like you're going through those kind of cycles of behaviour, or you're having those kind of feelings and thoughts around yourself or around food, just to like check out, or to call us, or to just speak to someone that you know. And sometimes like when people talk things through, that it can kind of make them realise that something might be going on. So it's just important to just look out for yourself and for the people that you know.
Well, absolutely. The website, beateatingdisorders.org.uk. The resources on there, that's beateatingdisorders.org.uk. Presumably as well, we talk about, mental health in the programme, but the links with physical health, presumably with eating disorders, it's a pretty direct correspondence because your normal intake of food isn't the same. That's going to have a physical impact on your body almost straight away, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's one of those things where the two very much cross over. Does that fit into the warning signs, or is that maybe one of the other things that people call up about because they're starting to notice the physical
I imagine
changes?
it does so, but we aren't trained in that, so we can't really go into that. So if someone does call us worried about like kind of physical symptoms they're experiencing, we'd send them to ring 101 or go to the doctors if it was something, or the hospital if it was something that was quite urgent. But like we're not really trained in that, so we can't really advise on it.
Yeah.
But we would always advise if anyone was, worried about a friend or a family member or worried about themselves, that maybe they do have an eating disorder or that they develop an eating disorder, to always, seek advice from their GP and, ask for referrals, whether that be counselling or therapy or a dietitian. There are a range of resources out there, and it's all just about finding what works for you. A lot of people are apprehensive about, making an appointment. It can be quite a daunting thing. But they are there to support you, and we do have a lot of resources on our website as well on to guide you through that, to guide you through the appointment. There's a leaflet that you can print off and take along with you. There's sections for someone with an eating disorder, someone supporting someone with an eating disorder, and also a section for the GP as well. So maybe if someone was scared and they didn't know what to say to the GP, they could just hand that leaflet over and it explains what they're there for, what eating disorders are, that it's important to think about their thoughts and feelings as opposed to how they look or the physical signs as well.
Yeah, and we're always happy to talk through someone if any of the advisors would. If you were worried about going to the GP or anything, you could just give us a call, and we're happy to talk through any of those worries and discuss the kind of things that might happen and the kind of things you have to talk about.
One of the things we haven't touched on so far, other than discussing the ignorance around eating disorders, is that I think, if this was happening in a family today, there'll be a lot of people going, right, we need to force feed, we need to monitor every single thing that this person is eating, we need to be watching them, we need to be in a room with them all the time, we can't let them be on their own, because people would think it's about the food, so let's control the food. From what you've been saying, it's quite clearly, although it's about food, it's not about food, so it's other things that are going on in people's lives. So our response to people with eating disorders has got to bear all those factors in mind, that although we think, well, if we can control the food, then we're controlling the situation, the reasons for the eating disorder haven't gone away. They're exactly the same. And that's about getting the right course, right reaction to an eating disorder, which has got to really cut to the heart of why it's there in the first place.
I think you have to think of it as, say, if you were struggling with something and your way of coping with that was to go home and paint your nails, how would you feel if someone said to you, well, you can't do that? I'm taking that away from you, you're not doing it. And there's nothing else, there's no other way that you can cope with it. You'd struggle with it, wouldn't you? So you have to think that someone with an eating disorder, their eating disorder behaviours, that is what they use to cope. So you can't just take it away from them, it will make things worse. It's about working with someone to find out what feels manageable for them at that time. And it could be that as a family you do need to monitor food, like when people are in treatment and on food plans and things like that, but it's all like by an individual case. So it's just about talking to the person who is suffering and finding out what they feel is okay to do and what is going to reach the end goal of recovery.
Yeah, it's about setting boundaries as well. So, maybe if you don't want to talk about food at all in a family environment, that's not, something that's, necessarily achievable because, like you say, food is there all the time. And, in a family setting, that's something quite difficult to avoid. So, there's no harm in having conversations as a family, asking, your loved one with an eating disorder, what is it that you'd like us to, not mention or to mention? Are there any things that you find difficult talking about? And how can we, build around that? How can we, set those barriers down and, make it manageable for everyone?
So when we think about eating disorders, we need to think about eating disorder being a symptom with a cause, which is something else.
Yeah.
So we need to focus really on what the cause is to try and solve that issue, and then not that it's then going to solve itself.
It's kind of, I'd say, the way I'd compare it is, say if so someone who suffers with anxiety, there isn't always one specific cause. So someone's eating disorder might have developed because they were stressed about their exams, but those exams being over, their eating disorder might subside a little bit, but it could then come back. So it isn't that specific cause.
Right.
It can just be like all sorts of like general things that could happen. So it's more so treatment is often about helping someone to change their thought process. So helping them to realise that maybe losing weight isn't going to achieve what they think it's going to achieve, or that there are different ways of coping. So helping someone to learn what better way they can cope with something. So maybe different coping mechanisms and helping them to develop them.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, there's, like we mentioned before, there's not always one exact cause, but it could be, that anxiety may have caused it, or, a change in environment. But there's loads of factors within that, you can maybe manage a few yourself, but maybe with the rest you need some support. And it's about being able to access that support and ask for that help as well.
When people call the helpline, are they aware of that? If they say that maybe they're telling you they've got an eating disorder, do sometimes you need to have a conversation with them about their circumstances and what they're going through, for them to realise that actually the eating disorder is a symptom or a coping strategy for something else? Because
it kind of depends what stage they're in, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think with a lot of a lot of cause that can be the case, and it can be okay. Well, what can you do to help with those emotions or with those feelings? As an alternative, or as something that you can maybe put in place alongside your own coping mechanisms to make that gradual change over.
Yeah, and often people can feel quite overwhelmed. So when you do say that to them and give them, like, can we think of some coping mechanisms? Is there anything that's worked before? And you have that conversation with them, they go, oh, I can't believe, like, that's so simple. I'm going to do that and hopefully that's going to work. But because they maybe worked themselves up so much and they were focusing so much on one thing that they couldn't even see those other things that might work. So it's kind of just about having a conversation and trying to help them see what is best for them, because one size doesn't fit all. You can't give everyone the same advice. So it's important to listen to someone, and that is what families should do as well. Find out their specific things that they struggle with, the barriers that they're facing, and work together to overcome them.
I guess that's one of the sort of the wider conversations to be had around how we engage with young people and teach them about their own mental health and well-being. That we give them the power to be able to spot those signs of stress and anxiety and those things that might then take them down a path that might be depression, that might be suicidal thoughts, that might be an eating disorder, any one of those, multiple factors of those things as well, which if we taught young people about those things, they might have that moment of realisation a little bit further up the road, which would allow them to sort of take a different path if they get it, or find a different path.
Yeah, but we also need to make sure that people are approachable as well, because even if a young person, or it isn't just young people, that this happens to anyone, if they don't feel like anyone in their life is approachable, then that's another barrier. So you need to, like, as the public, we need to know, like, within our roles and things like that, that we have knowledge of eating disorders and that we will be non-judgmental. And it isn't just like as advisors, it's as like a colleague, a manager, a friend, a parent, a sister, a brother, like everyone. It's important that people have knowledge and they are approachable.
Absolutely, but that wouldn't that be great? People can sort of take that on board, because we're heading into the Christmas period, which is, I mean, everything's about food, and everyone's got an auntie or an uncle that'll say the wrong thing, maybe not even deliberately, but just through lack of education, lack of knowledge around it, and everyone then just tuts and shakes their head. But it can potentially do damage to that individual. But then we need to know so much about so many different things, because they can appear in our lives out of the blue within a family setup, and then we need to know what to do. And we need to know where to go, and we need to know what helplines are available and what online services and where people can find out more information, which is why organisations like you are great, and it's why we get you on the programme to sort of spread that message as well. So the website, beateatingdisorders.org.uk, and there is a helpline number. Now, there's 2 national helplines, is that right? One for adults and one for young people under the age of 25, and there's telephone and email services available. Should we do numbers now, or do you want to do just point people in the direction of the website. Is that the best way of doing it?
Yeah, just go in the direction of the website and it's all on there because there was a few different lines. So just go to the website,
There's a tab on our website called Support Services, and all our contact details, the email, the online groups, all the information to get onto those, the links and things like that can all be found there as well.
There's online services there, message boards, young persons section, online chat facility, online support groups, and a help finder directory as well. Support groups on there, as we've mentioned, and some stats and facts around eating disorders as well. I'm just going to throw these out just before we wrap up the conversation. A quarter of people with eating disorders are male. I think that people will be surprised to hear that. 15% of the calls to the helpline were about someone aged 40 or over. That's interesting again, isn't it? According to a survey study in 2003, 80 to 85% of people with eating disorders are not overweight, which again flies in the face of what people may have thought. And stereotypes about who gets eating disorders might make them even harder to spot among older people, men and boys, and people from ethnic and cultural minority backgrounds. The real number of sufferers overall could be much higher than we think, but particularly among groups like these, which just goes to show the complexity of the whole situation. And if people want to find out more information, beateatingdisorders.org.uk is the website, and the helpline numbers are on there as well. Find the right one for you or a family member, a colleague, whoever it is. Beat Eating Disorders. Holly and Sophie on Radio City Talk on Mental Health Monday. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Really fascinating conversation, and really appreciate you coming into the studios.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Website one more time, beateatingdisorders.org.uk. Don't worry, you can find more information on that site. But also, if you want to find mental health services close to you, you can use the Hub of Hope, hubofhope.co.uk. Type in your postcode there, and you can find a whole host of different mental health services for a whole host of different issues as well. hubofhope.co.uk. Mental Health Monday from Radio City Talk.
Mental Health Monday on Radio City Talk with Mick Coyle.
Radio City Talk.